Hello, thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm Iain Moran, Managing Director of Crowdguard, and also on the call we've got Gary Dean, Founder and Director of Audiebant, Professor Keith Still, he's the Director of Crowd Risks, and Mr. Rob Walley from the Managing Director of Control Events. We really appreciate you joining us today for this webinar. And what it does, it aims to educate and help you understand how intelligent audio closes the communication gaps at an event. So if you've got any questions as we go through the webinar, feel free to pop them into the chat. We'll try to pick some up as we go along, and we'll try and have a little bit of a roundup at the end of the webinar today. So the aim of the webinar is to really highlight the importance of having a plan of action if an incident occurs at an event, and how intelligent audio communication can close that comms gap. So as those of you who know Crowdguard and have worked with us in the past, it's never just been about putting a HVM barrier in place and in situ. Hostile vehicle mitigation forms part of a layered approach to protecting an event. And what a hostile vehicle mitigation barrier ultimately does is deter an attack on your event from a vehicle in the first instance, and then performs to the level it's been tested and rated to if it was called into action. But in reality, what happens next? And that's what today is a little bit about, because there should always be a plan of action. There should always be a plan to call to action if an incident was to occur. And that's where we have partnered with Audiobant to help that next stage of the plan to be communicated effectively and allow action to kick into place. So the reality is, if an incident does occur, it buys you time. If somebody was to drive into a hostile vehicle mitigation measure at your event, it's buying you precious time to put your plan into action. Now, how do you communicate that and how do you put that into effect? Yes. So for that plan of action to be effective, A, you need a plan in the first place, but B, you need to then communicate that plan and get it out to the attendees of the event, to the staff of the event, and for people who need to know what to do next. So hostile vehicle mitigation is always installed. It's part of a security process. We need to understand the threat, the vulnerability and risk to the particular event and the particular locations of the event. That goes hand in hand with what the operational procedures are of the event and the physical obstructions and physical constraints that you may have on site. So you've got to tie a number of factors together before selecting the correct hostile vehicle mitigation, making sure that it's operationally viable. Therefore, your HVM doesn't fall into the too difficult box for the event to go ahead, the event to operate, authorised vehicles to enter and exit if required. And you need to marry these things together. But that's only part of a layered solution. It's a hard stop, tends to be behind a soft closure in the carriageway. But the whole point of today is understanding what happens next if somebody was to drive into your hostile vehicle mitigation measure. And it's where we really feel that, intelligent audio communication, it allows them layers to function. What it actually does is it ties everything together, whatever your different layers of security are, and whatever is in your plan to react to an event, intelligent audio communication really pulls all that together and allows it to go into action seamlessly. So that's what we're about today. It's educational. Hopefully it's a good session, and I'm going to pass you over to Gary, who's going to talk about what intelligent audio looks like and how it closes that gap between decisions being made on site and then decisions going into action instantly and seamlessly. So over to yourself, Gary.
Thank you, Iain, and welcome everybody, and thank you, Iain, and Crowdguard for hosting this event today. I think it's a great opportunity for us all to explain how things work and everything. Now, a bit of background about myself, which I think you need to know. I'm not here today to educate people on security or safety That's not my bag. Even technology is not my bag. And you probably think, well, you know, what is Audiebant about? What I've amassed over my past 40 years in the business I've been in has been in communication and media. That's what I've specialized in. Now, the communication element, I've worked in everything from radio, TV, visual, etc. And I know what response, I know what the best response is because I have the data. So when it comes to communications, that's what I consider myself to be an expert in, as opposed to what you guys out there probably do at the moment. So what we have developed is quite simple. It's a little box. It's a little mini computer that sits inside, what should we say, a PA style system. It's like a tall box with speakers on it. It just looks like a PA system, but the clever part is what's actually inside the equipment. And what we've developed is a system that really, you can see what we've got up on the screen at the moment, the Ascend trials. This is what it matches with. Now, what was done, the MPSA and Counter-Terrorism Police for 2 years looked at ways of communicating with people when an incident was taking place. Now, obviously, they were looking at a building, whether it's a building or it's outside, it makes no difference. What they came up with, they said that the best way to communicate with people in an incident is by zoning areas. So different areas, different levels. And you can see on that picture there, you've got underground, you can see where the threat is, but you've got people in different areas. Is to be able to communicate different messages in those areas to either get people to stay put, either to evacuate, either to evacuate, to basically direct people. If we just move on to the next slide, though, what they actually said, if we can put the word, there we go. So what they actually said, you really should have a trained operator that can make authoritative, specific, frequent, concise, repeated, reassuring messages. Now, to find these types of people, it's very, very difficult. They have to be trained. It can be expensive, etc. So what we've developed at Audiebant is, I think we can drop that slide down now. What we have developed at Audiebant is a system, as it's, if anybody can see that, it's a little box. That's what sits inside the equipment. That's all it is. The technology is in there. And what we've done in there, we can pre-program the messages. So if we look at a site, we'll have somebody like Dr. Keith Still that will look at a site and position these PA systems. Now, these mini PA systems will go out around a site, but what people will look at is, if we have an incident, what messages are going to be played? So if you want people to go to the south, to the east, to the west, to stay put, each machine works individual. So you can actually move the people where you want them to move to. You can already pre-do the messages inside, so that the messages will be concise, they'll be clear. Everything what the MPSA wants from a trained advisor, you can actually pre-do those messages there and then. So when an incident does happen, you haven't got the operator thinking, right, what have I got to say for this area? What have I got to say for that area? What have I got to say for that area? When they know where the threat is, it's as simple, either from a control room or from a mobile device or from any device, you can basically just tick boxes, press play, and simultaneously all the messages will be going to every machine, no matter where those machines are. So you can actually make sure that your crowds are under control and they're getting the right messaging. If you haven't got that message in there, I could actually speak into my telephone or onto anything that I can have a piece of equipment that I can speak into, and it won't come out as my voice. It will come out as a voice that's already been clearly defined, that is the right message, the right tone, and the right language, and getting the right message out there. So there'll be no fear, there'll be no rambling, there'll be nothing in the voice. It will be just clear and concise. That's how the system works. But it sounds very simple, and it is very, very, very simple to operate. Now, that's a safety element, and that's why we're all here today. But what I have found when I've been working within security and safety, because we're installing lots of these within buildings, etc. When it comes to security, money is always tight. Nobody likes spending money on security. That's what I have found. That's a personal thing. Now, with this particular piece of equipment, because it is a PA system, and we are looking at the Zone X outside area, what you can find is you can pre-schedule messages. It doesn't just sit there and do nothing. So throughout the day or throughout the event, it's creating a better customer experience for you. So you can schedule announcements. Now they might be health and safety announcements. It might be like you get on the railway or in an airport. You might want to put those out regular to see if somebody spots something. You can schedule these, and you can schedule them in different areas. So if you want different areas to say different things, you can do that. It helps immensely on ingress and egress, telling people where to go at the right time in the right places. Another thing is the revenue generation and sponsorship. We have done this in the past where you can get sponsorship, whether it would be your local car dealer, it could be a brand like Rolex, whatever. They will pay money for sponsorship. Now, the sponsorship then obviously makes it very, very attractive for a client, because a client's thinking, well, what am I getting for my money? If you can get some return on your revenue, but the most thing is you create the safety element to it as well. It gives you a two-pronged approach on this for everyone. Also, you can promote future events, future fixtures, whatever you may have. Maybe selling merchandise. It's so easy. The equipment is so easy to operate. But at the end of the day, it is keeping everybody informed. So when you do have an incident, there is nothing quicker, clearer, and concise. And as I say, I wouldn't like to go any further on the safety elements of that, because I am not a specialist. That's not my bag. That's not my field. I know how to communicate, but when you talk about experienced people in crowd movement, crowd modeling, crowd safety, that type of thing, that's not my bag. But obviously, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Keith still very, very soon, because he's the expert on this. Have you got any questions, Iain, there? Have I covered everything you think?
Yeah, just on the tech side of things, Gary, without getting too technical. I think, common communication gaps at events are, some events that we work on are quite small, and that communication piece can be done kind of face to face, but some are extremely large and span a wide open space on a large greenfield site, for example. From a tech perspective, filling that hole and that communication gap to make it instant. Do you have any troubles from noise or distance or, signal from 5G, or it's Starlink enabled as well, isn't it, the Audiebant system? So how does the system deal with, mass crowds in that respect?
Yeah, with Starlink is a key. With Starlink, you get complete coverage every time, so you don't have an issue with Starlink. But even if it was on a large event and you were using the 4G and 5G, because the technology that we've got inside, we can flick from one provider to another provider, so we always get the strongest provider in there. So there's two elements on the tech on that as well, Iain. So you've got Starlink, and because we've built it in such a way, we can choose any provider, but it does it itself. If it can't get it from EE, it will get it from Vodafone. If it doesn't get it from Vodafone, it will pick another one up. Yeah.
Okay, so it'll automatically search for the best possible signal to stay online at all times from a tech perspective, backed up by the Starlink element. And it takes away that potential issue to rely on, people with radios making incoherent messages at the moment of panic if something was to happen, with all the best training in the world, when an incident is to occur, or if an incident was to occur, how human nature kicks in and reacts can be very different to all the best training in the world. So with the Audiebant system, then messages, as you alluded to, can be pre-programmed to, at the push of a button, send the message out there, and to get them out and get that message to the masses at the push of a button without the human nature factor when under pressure. And I think that's really important when, during events, things change a lot, for the people in the room, so to speak, and that plan can change mid-operation. So if things were to change last minute, is that something that can still be controlled and can be programmed in a controlled manner to allow, again, a seamless integration?
Yeah, because the thing is, in this little box, everything sits in there. So if you have one incident, you don't just have one message in one area. You'll have multiple messages. And when we get to Rob later, when you look at where people's what they need to say in the different areas, if you have multiple messages, it's a case of which one do you want to choose to play. So when if the threats or an incident's happening, it never stays still.
Mm-hmm.
It can move. So as it moves, you can change the messaging as well as it goes along. And again, if the messages hasn't been programmed, because on a big site, it won't be the whole area, it'll be where the threat's moving. So depending on how many machines you've got out there, it just depends in which area the threat is that you work away from there. But the ones that are far away, the messaging wouldn't need to be changed as quickly. But I think when we come to Rob later, even when you've got a trained officer, that instant thing of being able to make an announcement to tell the crowd what to do instantly is very, there's a lot of pressure there to say the right things, to get the right one, and then to think of all the other areas that he's got to think of, but then keep repeating it, because you have to keep the crowds informed, which I think, Dr. Still will mention in a little while.
Yeah. Just a couple of questions that have just popped up. I've noticed one from Simon just about how the units are powered.
Yeah. So they're powered by a battery, but they have solar power as well. So the battery that we have in there will last, I think it's 5 days without any sunlight. So they work on battery. But if you've got a festival or event and it's for 2 weeks or whatever it might be, or you want to use them for longer, they do work on solar power as well. So you've got both.
Understood. Thanks very much. And from Kevin Roberts, just talking about the 4 and 5G at major events with how high crowd numbers, does it become unusable, or do you have bandwidth limitations, or are you finding because of that natural way to jump between 3G, 4G, 5G and Starlink that you don't tend to lose that connectivity? It's reliable.
You don't lose Starlink, you don't lose it.
Okay.
On Starlink, you don't lose it. So yeah, if you've got Starlink, you never lose Starlink. You will always get that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Steve Hutchinson making some good points on CCTV being integrated and how CCTV can help, locating where the threat originates. That's our next webinar, Steve. We personally, I see the point, Steve, but we're not getting into the realms of CCTV and that type of thing. We do have a static image called Snapshot Live that we integrate with our systems that actually allows an audible trail of positioning of HVM. But again, highlighting where the threat occurs and where an incident occurs, Steve, absolutely. It's a mass communication. It's part of that, layered security approach of somebody reporting that, and then the mass communication, the intelligent communication system kicking into effect in reality. And then that's what this intelligent audio does. It allows to bring all that comms together and the message to be out there and put out there. So I think ultimately what we feel that the intelligent audio system does is it closes that gap between, a risk being highlighted or cause and effect happening, and then getting that message out there. It closes the gap between a decision-making process and the action, on the ground, kicking into action and allowing people to evacuate, run, hide, tell, whatever it may be. I think Gary's given an overview there of, what the system's makeup is and what its ability is and what it can and can't do. But basically, it can give clear instructions to crowds at a moment of panic. It can faster escalate or de-escalate situations. and it gives consistency across, mixed sites that are being used and complex sites that are used for different things, because it can have zonal messaging that provides specific messaging for specific locations. So again, tying in, the stewarding, the control room decisions, signage, traffic management on a day-to-day basis, even when an incident doesn't occur, but giving you the ability to kick the plan into action if an incident does, and that's proportionate risk mitigation. So now we all understand a little bit more about the technology, and what it does and how it does it. I think we'll bring Keith in to bring that into crowd dynamics and why communication genuinely is a control measure in managing risk at events on a every, on a normal day-to-day basis of your event. Plus, again, if the worst was to happen. So I'll pass over to you, Keith, if you don't mind, sir.
Sure, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to talk today. I've got a couple of slides that kind of give you some background and detail on this. To start with, I got a huge amount of experience in this area, and I'm not going to relay it all out, but I think one of the most important elements of that is being an expert witness, looking at how communication is so vital to expediting an emergency and bringing it very quickly under control. A number of sites we worked at, for instance, false active shooters. Once the alarm goes out and people start shouting, he's got a gun, the crowd in one particular instance, a fairly famous casino in Las Vegas, they brought the entire environment under control within a minute. And they did so by using a very clever communication strategy, one which we can emulate. So I've got a lot of experience in those fields, and knowing how systems have failed and how systems have succeeded is why I'm so interested in the Audiebant system. Now, I teach at a number of universities around the world, but basically I study disasters. Things that go wrong, why things go wrong. My expert witness testimony on the Astroworld case is in the public domain. If anybody wants to look at it, send me an email and I'll send you a link. But things like Seoul, South Korea, where you've got a nighttime economy. Everybody comes out there after Halloween, the place becomes overcrowded. Previous years, they had management strategies in place, but in this year, because it had been COVID, the systems had been forgotten about. And yet that entire environment has wired PA. And that's one of the things that's most important about mass communication, existing PA systems, and how, as Gary's just demonstrated, a little black box can actually filter into something that's already there. Now, one of the key problems is language and communication. And unfortunately, in the English language, I've heard all of these terms used at events. It's like Piccadilly Circus down there. It's chock full, it's wall to wall, it's stuffed, it's overpopulated, it's crowded, it's burst into the... And none of that really helps us, because language and words and using communication, that can increase the amount of time it takes to respond. So this is all highly subjective and very emotive, and people have different interpretations. I have heard somebody at the front of the stage saying, it's crushed down here. Now, what he meant was that it was busy. What the control room interpreted that was an imminent risk of death. So clarifying the language, making sure that we define terms such as density and flow using very simplified language in order to communicate interprofessionally and with the crowd. So things like the graphics that we've developed in order to determine green, amber and red, you don't need to know whether this is in meters or in feet. In the USA they're using yards. It's packed, and we've got green, amber and red in terms of packing. So defining crowd density helps us define crowd risks, and it's like a tachometer on a car. The principle's the same. The risk of failure increases when you're in the red zone. So we developed a whole range of tools that allow us in the control room to look at models and analysis and information on how to be able to keep built and complex environments safe. So these are all about the dynamics of risk. Now, back in 9/11, just after the World Trade Center bombing, I was part of a team that went out there to investigate, what went wrong. And basically, in all of the scenarios we look at, there's a threat. And you've got two routes. You can move the people, or you can keep them where they are, in which case you might need to think about shelter in place and air. But where is your place of safety? Where are your safe zones? These all need predefined, and it all sits within that bubble of information. Now, there are challenges associated with public communication. What information should be given? If so, how much information should be given? What means should it be delivered by, and how is it best expressed? Now, I want to set you an example here that happened out in Toronto in the Raptors game. This was an active shooter on the site who was very quickly brought under control. The police shot him. But we've got two sections to the event I'm going to show you. The top section is under direct communication by the DJ, the announcer. He was a radio personality, and he had an earpiece, and the earpiece told him that the shooter had been brought under control. So he's now communicating with the crowd, whereas the bottom end of this section has no direct PA communication. And let's have a look at the difference here. Active shooter. The crowd are now reacting to each other, shouting, he's got a gun, and they're all running. But the top end of that section was brought under control because of PA announcements. So there's your crowd moving. So this section here has got direct communication from the announcer. And this is a clip from his radio broadcast after the event telling what he did.
Interrupt everything, and then also keep everything as calm as you possibly can, given the information that you have. And then I also felt like, the longer that I spoke, hopefully hopefully everybody would be patient and calm, which they were, given that situation.
So again, the area of the crowd he's got direct communication with, speaking in that tone of voice, his radio announcer's voice, kept them calm. And the rest of the area was, so a lot of serious and significant injuries of trip, slips and falls and people running and falling over each other. So in an emergency, that level of communication is clear and concise, but he's a trained radio announcer. That's his job, to be able to communicate. Not everybody has those skills. And that's where Audiebant, to me, comes in with an enormous facility, using AI for mass communication, delivering the message, but then having that converted into an AI voice, or having pre-recorded messages and zones and details. Stuff that I've been doing for decades. How to zone a site, how to communicate with various elements of the site. Now, Gary and I did a demonstration to the public event commanders. I run a public event commander training course, and all public event commanders in the UK have to pass this course. It's a mandatory training element, and we demonstrated the kit. We brought the box along, and what was exciting then is something like Notting Hill Carnival with Starlink. They just plug that into any DJ's mixer panel, and now they've got control of using the existing PA to communicate with that crowd. Now, whether it's an emergency cutover or whether it's actually public information, the same system can be utilized for both. So what was fascinating to them is that not only could they give information, for instance, as Gary's defined earlier, what else is on in the event, what other information is going on. So there's your organizer utilizing the same system for public information, and then the police have an access via the mobile app to be able to give emergency communications across the same channel. Now, what they've had to do at the moment is have an officer stand on the mixer panel. Somebody then radios information to that officer saying that you need to cut the PA announcement and then make this announcement. Now, that officer now has to be trained in communication. You have to have one at each mixer desk. So the actual scalability of being able to deploy effective communication is now negated with the Audiebant black box. It plugs into the PA system, and now you've got direct communication from your command and control center to the crowd. And that's something that's not been feasible in the past without having some set of individuals, all of whom need to be trained, all of whom need to keep within their repository of information in their head the things that are associated with that event, that incident, that area. Now, crowd safety planning is stuff that we've been doing for decades. From the Sydney Olympics, took us about 2 weeks to develop a model of the entire site. indicate green, amber, and red, and blue and yellow here for levels of service. And in the control room, they've got an access to the model showing them what they're expecting. They can see the train schedule. They can see the weather radar, any serious rain coming across. They can look at any monitor and pull it up to the big screen. But with a command and control hold and release mechanism, their communication now is to, from the control room, talk to the local supervisor in a particular zone, tell him what he needs to do, and to hold the crowd back in order to prevent upstream or downstream congestion. Now, of course, again, with Audiebant, you can cut across that because the control room can press a button on their zoned command and control system, and in a cool, calm, collected voice, that goes out to that local PA area, and your stewards are now just acting as the physical bodies on the ground. So in control rooms, at Hong Kong Jockey Club, you see there the models, the images of what density looks like. When they see that on the screen, they've got an action point, and again, what they're having to do is communicate with the ground staff in order to tell them what they're seeing, for the ground staff to then interpret what's happening and then issue crowd commands. Even with small events, they're using systems here to analyze the crowd density in order to communicate, but he's got no direct method of communicating with the crowd. He has to talk to a supervisor who then has to pass that message on. And something like Edinburgh Control for City Centre, when we were working with Murrayfield, this is Edinburgh to 2, but all of the command and control situations for wide area communications, not just in English, but if you've got an overseas game, say with Italy, I need to be able to communicate in Italian. And I'm going, AI does that with you. You know, I'm sending a message out. Which language do you want to do it in? So all the systems that we've been installing for the last 30 years or so, the missing element has been direct communication from the control room to the crowd. It's always had an interface associated with either an additional police officer or somebody else that's trained in it. Now, with Audiebant, you've got that facility. Pre-programmed trained messages and information. And the beauty about AI is that I'm not repeating the message because I'm humanizing the tone. So I can say, please leave this area immediately. And then the next time it comes across either with a different voice or a different intonation. So AI really gives us this question of balance, smarter insights, safer choices. Thanks for listening. I'll hand you back to Iain.
Thanks, Keith. I really appreciate that, mate. I think it shows, and especially with the video that Keith showed there of, you know, what communication to a crowd can actually achieve and how it can reduce risk and how it can prevent things from escalating or people doing something wrong in that type of scenario when panic kind of kicks in. So I think it's, you know, as a key takeaway, it really does highlight, and it's what was highlighted to ourselves, you know, with the number of large events that we work on, you know, crowd safety, it's not just about a barrier and not just about stewards. It's really, really important in how we can effectively communicate to the people at the event to reassure them in the first instance, to guide them to what they need to do and where they need to be. And as being demonstrated by Gary and Keith, this Audiebant system and its intelligence allows that to be done very, very seamlessly and take away a lot of subjectivity. So I'm going to pass over to Rob. Now we understand a little bit about that behaviour of the crowd and what the Audiebant system can do. Rob will look at this from an operational perspective and how that breaks down kind of in zone messaging, what good practice looks like, and, you know, and how communications actually work on real live sites. So I'll pass over to yourself, Rob, if that's okay.
Thanks very much, Iain. Rob Walley, Managing Director of Controlled Events. And in preparing for this webinar, I was thinking about my first control room experience was in 2005 in a borough control room after the 7/7 bombings. All of a number of organisations were designing control rooms and thinking about what we needed to have in place. And I wish we'd had today some of the information back then in terms of that experience, and what Keith was talking about is so important to the effectiveness of a control room. And Gary, some of the technology you've talked about is going to be a game changer for how control rooms can implement faster communications. Three key areas that are really of interest to me as someone who helps design and run control rooms, and that's around, firstly, capability. So the technology is there. From what Gary said in terms of the kit on the ground, Keith, but discussing some of the opportunities. There are risks with AI, but significant opportunities there to improve our communication. And actually, for several years, there's been guidance from the National Protective Security Authority that Gary alluded to as well, arising from live trials and crowd psychology as well. However, those capabilities I don't see embedded in the average control room that I work in, and that's sometimes down to plans haven't been pre-agreed in terms of messaging being templated in advance. Certainly on the people side of things, people are our biggest variable in a control room. Often our crowd messaging at the moment relies on our ability to engage with the crowd, and people like Keith and others in guidance terms have talked in other forums about trust, authority, how we get a relevant message out to our public. The crowd mistrust authority. They're not going to instinctively follow a message that they don't believe in. A lot of my plans at the moment rely on staff with loudhailers out on the ground at a temporary event putting a message out. And we know that in an adverse weather or a security incident, our staff are not the most effective means of that communication. So for me, that's a vulnerability as well. And lastly, most of the events that I work on, they're temporary, or they may be a temporary event in an existing venue. So muscle memory, training and exercising, for me, is one of the key areas where whatever the technology is, we need to have actually practiced it and actually have the confidence in our team to use it. Something that both Gary and Keith mentioned earlier on is that speed of communication. And Iain, you mentioned around in HVM terms, you are trying to create that standoff, create that time in which you can take decisions.
Yeah.
And that for me, in the control room, you've got a really short amount of time, and be it in exercises that we've run or training courses that we run in this area, so there are some real challenges that are hard to overcome. Do we understand where the risk is? And if we know where the area of risk is, how do we then zone our messaging in an effective way? There might be, if we cascade messages out to people through radio and trickle information out via staff, changes in the meaning or tone of that message as well. I remember a particularly impactful example at Westfield in London, where the word fire alarm was misunderstood by certainly the public and maybe staff as firearm. So actually the way that a message can drift as we get that communication out about an incident can be a real challenge. I'd say also the delays in the control room are inevitable with the status quo as things are. So by the time we've interpreted an incident, we've put together the message template, we've got that approved, and we've put that message back out. That, for me, in real terms, in an exercise last month, took about 5 minutes. And that was a security threat rapidly moving into a venue, and a really effective control room with today's tools would not be quick at getting a message out. And anything we can do to reduce that time lag, for me, is a really important step forward. So a bit of my thought on good practice would be that there are some good tools out there. The National Protective Security Authority guidance has specific templated messaging. I'd say only about half of the events and venues we work with are aware of it. So actually drawing that guidance to life needs to happen in the planning stages. And I say that because some of the messaging may be uncomfortable, subjective. There may be different views. I've certainly had partner agencies say, oh, we can't put a message out that's that direct. It might alarm people. So these things need to be planned in advance and baked into our control room plan. I'd say also that the pre-prepared templates need that practice as well. So something we certainly encourage on training courses, and one of the reasons we'll actually be deploying Audiebant with Crowdguard in May on one of our advanced control room courses, is all about that muscle memory and staff having the confidence and experience to use the technology and to put messages out effectively as well. So those are a few thoughts from me in terms of some of the challenges, and I'd say the opportunities are around Audiebant, I think, with the flexibility of the tool to put real-time messaging out, for that messaging sometimes to be pre-incident in terms of that safety, security and service message will build trust in a system that actually we hope we never need to use for an emergency. But if we do, the flexibility is something that's of interest to me in a control room, because we could prepare 10 templated messages, but it'll be the 11th or 12th that we need on the day potentially.
What would you say, Rob, would be for the room the kind of the quickest stroke easiest kind of process change that an organizer could implement to improve comms reliability? Is it a case of using some of the knowledge that's out there on the NPSA website and stuff like that?
Yeah, certainly. I think the guidance and posters that they've produced are excellent. That program for me has transformed and that control room experience. Their training is excellent as well. I think the bit where I see a gap is us adopting that guidance, and what we've done is turn that into a set of templated messages that we then ensure are not just visible in the control room but signed off by event decision makers, and also visible to those that may be putting the message out. It struck me from Keith's example that sometimes the artist at Notting Hill Carnival on stage, or the announcer broadcaster at that Canadian example, people will trust a recognized voice. So what was attractive from what Gary said was that you could plug this in to places within the event in a way that fills a real gap for me. I think at the moment, most of my events don't have a voice of God PA override in the control room. So we rely on that message going out by the stage team, who regularly say to me in exercises, so in the middle of this threat or in the middle of this lightning storm, you're expecting me to stay near the stage and repeat some messaging for you. And I think Audiebant, for me, it's exciting when I first saw the system that we can start to fill that gap with a technical system.
Oh, fantastic, Rob. Really appreciate that. I think what I'm hearing, and hopefully, everyone's hearing, is that it's about the accuracy of communication and the speed that can be put out there, and the consistency. That's what breeds, the confidence and gives the attendees, the staff, the clarity on the instruction of what they need to do, as opposed to just, it being done completely ad hocly. It's about accuracy and speed of communication, I feel. Would that be fair enough to say?
Yeah.
Great stuff. So really appreciate it, everybody. I think there's a couple of things that we've got a few minutes left that I just maybe want to throw out there to the room in reality. But Gary, Rob, Keith, feel free obviously to chirp in, and other people may or may not ask questions about this. But what do you feel proportionality looks like? Smaller events and larger events. We're always trying to make elements as cost effective as possible whilst improving security. How do you feel that proportionality looks between smaller events and major events from a communication piece? Is it something smaller events tend to struggle with more than larger events?
Yeah, I'd say, Ian, it's sometimes in the too difficult box. So especially on temporary events, I'm working on one coming up over Easter in London, where the start and finish venues are very, very temporary, but very, very busy locations. And the temptation is just to rely on the hospitality area or the broadcaster's ability to PA very specific areas. But that relies on quite a trickle down of communication, which involves several human inputs. And for me, that adds delay. So I think Audiebant, if it's deployable on that kind of occasional basis, easy to deploy, easy to integrate into the control room, that for me will make it more palatable to smaller organisers that I think would normally say, well, let's go with loud hailers, let's go with some stage messaging and leave it at that, because there hasn't been something that's filled that void effectively.
When we talked to the public event commanders, the training silver commanders there for tactical advice across the UK, their comment was, I buy one of these units and I can use it at any event. Well, yeah, absolutely. That's what it's designed for. So the cost effectiveness there for emergency communications is the police are the ones, or fire department, whoever's got access to it, and that's all done with coded and encrypted access. So a police officer, if the system's there, he can have direct access to it and unplug it and plug it into the next event that they're working at. So again, very cost effective from that sense.
Yeah, and I think to touch on something Gary said earlier as well, we're forever working with different types and different styles of events, different scales. But what we've had some success on is branding of hostile vehicle mitigation and sponsorship packages of that. And I think Gary touched on it a little bit earlier of getting your marketing teams involved that are hosting the event or in the authority, to reach out to local businesses on small scale events about getting some messaging on there and charging for that ability. So to try to get the Audiebant to be funded, to even potentially fund the hostile vehicle mitigation as well. It's pre-programmed advertising messaging that can put into there as well, Gary, correct?
It is. And that's what I've been doing for the past 40 years. I have another company that solely does, and we do thousands and thousands and thousands of different advertisers each year, and it's all through sponsorship. All an advertiser wants, a sponsor wants, is to get their name out in front of big crowds. So whether it's a football match, whether it's a festival, whatever, you will always find a sponsor. You'll always find multiple sponsors. It's a vanity thing. These people like to hear the name of their company, and they'll pay the money for it. So on things like this, by obviously partnering with Crowdguard, where some people think, oh, we can't afford the HVMs or whatever, or is it with Audiebant now? Iain, you could probably go with a package and say, look, the HVMs, yes, it's going to cost you this, but look at what you can make from your sponsor. Look what you can make from selling merchandise or your future events that you've got coming up. Because it's not just a great safety tool, it's a great marketing tool as well. As I said earlier, it's double-edged for everybody. So everybody wins. The event wins, the safety team wins commercially, and it's a better customer experience for everyone.
Cheers, Gary. Catherine's just popped a question in about do the numbers of machines you need depend on how big your site is? Could you just maybe touch on a little bit, Gary, about the range and the reach of the systems, please?
Well, we've got a MIDI system and a Mac system. So depending on the weather conditions, it depends on how many machines you do need. So they do throw. So we've done a few football stadiums. When you look at a football stadium, and a normal sized football stadium, you just need 4 machines. And if you wouldn't just put them in 4 corners, but technically you can put them in 4 corners, and it will give you good, clear coverage from one end to the other without too much bleed. So yeah, but on bigger sites, if it's a festival, you use the bigger units, and the bigger units can throw half a mile. No, seriously, they can be. But the thing is, you have control of the volume. Actually, I on my mobile phone, I can control the volume. I can control anything from a mobile phone. So I can control the volume. I can do anything from my mobile phone, from the control room. Any device, you can control everything with the system.
Yeah, and part of what we do now, Catherine, and for the room, that's part of that. We work with Catherine quite a lot on a number of events, and part of our offering and our service of Audiobant, in partnership with Crowdguard, is coming assessing each of your sites and each of your events, Catherine, to determine, how many units may be required, where the best location for them to be positioned is. And then, working closely with Keith and Rob, it's about determining the messaging that you want in there then. And then we can upload that messaging so it's all pre-programmed and train you on how to control the system if the worst was to happen and you needed to take some kind of emergency control over that system. So that all becomes part of the offering in that plan stage of our plan, provide, protect model that we run. I'll just cover one more from Mike that's just come in. If the operations control room has to be evacuated during a major incident, do we have redundancy in the system to maintain communications with people still on site sheltering in place?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's on your mobile phone, so we're talking about A police officer on the ground needs to communicate with the crowd for whatever reason. It might be the gold commander, it could just be a standard officer who needs to put a localized message out that area. Because it's on a mobile phone, anybody with coded access to the system is operating it from their phone. So location is independent of your actual physical control room, if needs be. So again, the flexibility there is it can be a command and control environment in the control room, or it can be command and control from a mobile unit that's on the ground that's seen something that needs to be identified on it. Catherine's question earlier, if you're integrating it into something like the Halloween Paisley experience, then you've already got PA announcements that are moving people from zone to zone. You're already developing and building that trust because it's a communication system. Now, if necessary, when an emergency occurs, you're using exactly the same system that you're communicating with, but it's controlled from your phone from a different location. For whatever reason, it might be a police officer has had a threat. They need to communicate with the crowd in that zone in the area. And all of that, of course, is into planning. It's into the things that Rob and I do. We sit down, we'll analyze the site, we'll look at what kind of messaging needs to be put forward, develop matrix analysis for all of the techniques that need to be put into play. So, you know, it's never sort of spontaneous. All of this is part of crowd safety planning.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say that some of the points around resilience of communications and power, points there in the chat, you have to have as a control room at multiple people and multiple ways of implementing this. And that redundancy of the kit itself, I think that power resilience on the unit that Gary mentioned is really helpful. One point was made earlier around CCTV. For me, when I first looked at the system, I sort of assumed, oh, well, that could have a plug-in, some CCTV capability. I actually think in a way, you know, welcome challenge from the panel and those on the call, that might actually distort the benefit for the end user. If they see it as a authority figure keeping an eye on them, CCTV is a fantastic tool, but actually the vantage points probably aren't at the four corners of the stadium. They're in multiple other areas as well. So for me, I'm quite tempted by the idea of them not having CCTV on them, because that knowledge and authoritative message that we're going to get from the system, that's what will build a trust with our audience. If they see it as sort of big brother watching them, I think CCTV is well employed on temporary events, but probably in different vantage points that are possibly higher above the crowd in different locations around the site. And yeah, I take on board that information assessment, though, does need to happen in the control room. That's where you're going to be fusing together what's happened and what the message needs to be.
If I can just go back to setting the messages, we do a lot in buildings. Education is a huge one for us. We probably install 10 to 20 systems a week in schools, colleges and universities. So from your smallest primary school to your largest university. And the teacher, there's no security there, teachers. So they actually designate certain teachers to be able to set these messages so that they work on the plan. So it's very, very simple to use from a mobile phone or from any device. But the great thing about it, there's two other things I haven't mentioned as well, is that, well, at one of the colleges, the threat was still inside the school. The police took over the system by using somebody's mobile phone and did a phased evacuation until they actually caught the threat or disarmed the threat or whatever. So it actually worked through the phased evacuation. There was another school where a child was actually stabbed and died. Our system was in there then, and then we had the Department for Education and the school contact us, could we have a report? Because obviously when an incident happens, everybody says, well, this could have happened, it could have been me, you know, what precautions you got? As soon as that child was stabbed, our systems, obviously because the system was set, it proved that the school set out all the messages simultaneously, all at the same time. So just of the duty of care alone, that school looked great, and it worked because everybody else was safe. The staff, the students, everyone's safe. So as soon as that incident happened, they were safe. And thirdly, I'll throw this one in as well. We've had meetings already with underwriters from 5 major insurance companies looking at this, because they obviously want to mitigate their losses as well. So if they know there's a system out there that can mitigate their losses, and we are working with insurance companies, I think Keith knows this as well, we're working with insurance companies at the moment because they're looking at mitigating losses, and this does give you a report and it shows you what can be done and what has been set.
Super. Cheers, Gary. Thanks for that. So I think, just to bring it to a close now, the webinar, I think what we want to highlight as a collective is that, hostile vehicle mitigation is just part of a layered solution to protecting events. That's what Crowdguard specialise in, and bringing this kind of partnership together to allow you to access Audiebant systems via Crowdguard. I think 3 practical takeaways, to kind of take away from this is that, try to understand where your communications actually break down in an event if you're trying to put a plan of action into place. Pre-planning that messaging as a control measure is very easy to do with an Audiebant system, so it doesn't then become an afterthought. There's thought into your plan and how you communicate that message if the worst was to happen, and just for the regular day-to-day event times. And we're pointing out that there's tools available that can help the decisions land and be clearly communicated on the ground seamlessly. So take them things away. I hope it's been okay for you today. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll speak to you shortly, and I'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you.